this CG Pro and Glassbox live stream. And today, very, very excited to welcome Glassbox technology to our live stream. We're going to be going through checking out some new tech they have with the Dragonfly virtual camera system. And I have two people here from Glassbox I would love to introduce to everybody. So we have Norman Wang, CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Technologies. Welcome, Norman.
Hey.
Norman
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Great to have you. Thanks for being here. So Norman is a published computer vision author, former PhD researcher in cognitive psychology, and performance capture and VR industry veteran. Since founding Glassbox, Norman and the team at Glassbox have been involved in several world-class productions in collaboration with some of the most innovative filmmakers and creative technologists. In 2019, Glassbox received the Lumiere Technology Award in recognition of its innovation in real-time production data management. Very cool stuff. And we also have Johannes Wilka, product manager of Glassbox Technologies. Welcome, Johannes. Great to have you here as well.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. So Johannes has a background in psychology and game development, an interesting combination. Johannes joined Glassbox in late 2017 as executive technical producer and later product manager. He's involved in coordinating the company's globally distributed development team and roadmap, working with both software engineers and users from all walks of the film industry on a daily basis. So both of you do a lot of really cool stuff. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
So, and we are CG Pro. We are a school. Just give us a quick intro into what we do. We're a school. We train people primarily in real-time computer graphics and primarily in the film industry as well. And we have many classes online. They're all taught live. And we're doing the world's first connectors program with Epic Games. And you can find out more about us at becomecgpro.com. All right. Well, Norman, would you like to give us an intro to Glassbox?
Yeah. So we're Glassbox. We're a specialized team that develops software tools for virtual production. And most of us kind of came from a combination of backgrounds, either from video games or from visual effects. And we've been working in this space for quite some time, really kind of drawing upon my past experiences from performance capture, game development, and then virtual reality. And then kind of since 2017, we've really been kind of expanding into this whole area of real-time production. And of course, today, what we're going to be showcasing primarily is our virtual cinematography tool, which is called Dragonfly. And it's a cross-platform tool based in Unreal Engine and also Maya. So we have a team in Australia, in Germany, and United States. So, if there's anybody from the audience that's kind of like from these areas, we're always really happy to kind of talk to you. And currently, I'm actually in Asia. So we're in the process of kind of opening up an office here as well.
Fantastic. Whereabouts in Asia?
I'm in Taiwan.
Are you allowed to say? Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Taiwan at the moment.
Very cool. All right. So next, Johannes, would you like to give us a brief intro to Dragonfly and tell us a bit about what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. Dragonfly is our virtual tool, so it gives you the ability to create cinematography inside the game engine or inside Maya. Ideally, like as if you were using a physical camera. So it gives you something physical in your hand, most often an iPad, and allows you to use that as a window basically into the virtual world, basically your viewport, really comparable to a physical camera that you can then use without much knowledge necessarily of how a game engine works, just leveraging the technology to create cinematography, whether your background is in engine technology or in cinematography, for example. And we've built Dragonfly 2016, 17, were around there. Basically, at the time when this whole industry started to converge around the idea of using game engine technology for cinematography purposes, and it has evolved quite a bit over time. For example, the first version of Dragonfly only knew OptiTrack and similar tracking systems because Apple hadn't released ARKit yet. And then later on, Apple released ARKit, and we thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. It's going to be a cool addition. But then really that turned into a significant way for people to use it because iPads are just so accessible. And yes, it's been an interesting ride to see the software evolve. I'm going to show you all of that in a live demo as well.
Fantastic. So tell us a bit about how Dragonfly solves virtual production pipeline problems.
Yeah, so Dragonfly solves all kinds of visual production pipeline problems that are revolving around cinematography. There is Previs. Previs is one of the things that people did very early on in visual production because it gets away with low optical quality, you could say, right? And so initially when game engines were really promising but weren't quite photorealistic yet, people already recognized that benefit compared to other tools existing at the time for doing previs. And then, of course, as Unreal Engine and other environments are evolving and more people from the cinema side come into this space as well, we see a lot more usage that is not only previs, but also other things like on-set visualization with Simulcam, things like actual final pixel in engine, right? Or then if we venture even further, things like in-camera VFX and LED volumes. So Dragonfly has a part in all of those areas. I think it would be actually interesting to hear in the chat which of those areas people are interested in, whether you've actually you are using technology like this in those areas already, or you're looking into starting to get into one or multiple of those areas, be it previs, be it Simulcam, in-camera VFX, volume work, be it in-engine, final, maybe. Really curious to hear where people are coming from.
Yeah, please do. If you all heard that, then the chat is open. Please drop your comments in there and we will bring them in as we can.
Well, while we wait for some comments to come in, I want to also expand on something that Johannes said. As it kind of relates to Final Pixel in engine, we sort of obviously we have two possible interpretations of it, right? So one is real-time visual effects, and then the other side is kind of animation production. So like a real-time animation production where we're creating final pixels directly in engine. And also something that Johannes touched on was this kind of convergence of different worlds and different disciplines. So live action filmmakers and cinematographers coming into the animation and kind of them technique and habits have from live action filmmaking. And so this is really an interesting space. And yeah, we absolutely love to hear from the audience. What is that? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I mean, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Johannes.
No, I was going to say, and then we can also jump straight into the demo as well.
Great. We do have one or two questions that are coming in.
There's a question here that
yeah, maybe having a little problem with your internet connection. I'm not sure, but I can ask them. Are you coming back on? So somebody's saying, how does Dragonfly compare? Yeah, we can hear you now. At least we can hear you. I'm not sure if
my internet connection seems a bit spotty.
I was having that same
do
issue
you want
in
to
New York a couple of days ago.
Take the question?
Yeah.
Do you want to take the QA now, or about how does it compare to Unreal Remote? Do you want to take that, Johannes, or should I?
You can take it. I think that's a perfect starting point, actually. I'm kind of happy about that question. Why don't you give a quick intro to that, and then as we can jump into, unless there's any other relevant questions, and show this in action as well. But I think that'll be a good primer.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So fundamentally, the concept is the same, right? So we're using ARKit, the capabilities of ARKit on these Apple devices as a very quick and very flexible way of doing virtual cinematography. So we're using essentially the phone screen or the iPad screen as our viewfinder, and then the ARKit to kind of give us motion through space. So in that sense, we're kind of similar. Where things do differ, though, is the remote really is kind of like trying to just control aspects of the engine, whereas Dragonfly have a very different philosophy about how we go about doing this. And a part of this is because it's fundamentally designed to be cross-platform. So the Unreal remote obviously only works with Unreal, and just Dragonfly is engineered to be cross-platform because we also have quite a lot of users in Maya in addition to Unreal. And also our companion app is really quite a lot more powerful in the sense that it does a lot more than just being a remote control for Unreal Engine. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I want to say that I think the Unreal VCam is actually a fantastic tool. I'm really glad that it exists, and I think it is. If it kind of requires you to know a lot about how Unreal Engine works, and it requires you to be okay with a very specific workflow, and also be a lot more hands-on and tinker a bit more. But I think if you're willing to do that, it's a very interesting thing for sure. Nice.
Fantastic.
Why don't I jump?
You want to go ahead and queue up the presentation? Yeah, go ahead. All right.
Awesome. Let me start sharing my screen here.
Okay.
So we are looking at Unreal Engine 5, of course, as you might already have noticed. We always provide Dragonfly in at least the 2 latest engine versions. So right now that's Dragonfly 4.7 and Unreal Engine 5. The reason for that is just that we find that it's common that shows take a while to switch over engines, and the latest 2 usually seem to cover everyone's needs that way. And then, of course, we also have this in Maya. If you are using using Dragonfly in Maya, I want to say that just because of Maya's capabilities in terms of real-time rendering, there's a little less that you can do in Maya, but it is still the same workflow. So that'll help you transition. If you, for example, start using it in Unreal, you will find the workflow familiar in Maya. So what is Dragonfly? The idea with Dragonfly is to have a equivalent of a physical camera inside of Unreal Engine, right? Something that's turnkey in a way that is you can plug into the engine, and that doesn't require you any more work on your end, that you can just switch on and start recording like a physical camera. So in this case, I have this scene here. This is just something from the asset store, and then I can turn on my Dragonfly viewport, and I have a couple of interfaces here. Anything that's orange typically is a good indicator that that's part of Dragonfly's UI. You can lay them out in whatever which way you want. And so, for example, I on the left side have the setup panel. We'll use that a little bit in the beginning to get things rolling, and then on the right side we have our operator main panel, which gives you all the tools and all the interfaces that you need while you are creating cinematography with this. And then the operator main panel has a second tab, which is called Review, which is currently empty, as you can see. And this will fill up with all the amazing, hopefully amazing takes that we'll take today. Because I want to take you a little bit in the first section of this. I want to take you through the process of getting this set up and then creating a shot with this. And then afterwards, see what other little tools and tricks there are that we can use with this to improve our workflow. So to begin with, of course, the first thing to start with is our scene. Again, that's just something downloaded. And then I put a little sequence in here, little animation for us to have something to look at. And then the third component, of course, is to be able to move our camera. And that, of course, is some sort of tracking. Dragonfly, as I said already, is very flexible. You can probably use any tracking system that there is. This might be a little far-fetched, but I haven't seen in the tracking system, at least, that we couldn't make work with this. We support a couple out of the box. One of them is ARKit. Then there's Vive Tracker, OptiTrack, LiveLink, and anything that doesn't even have a LiveLink component, you can usually still make work through custom. And then I today, because I'm in kind of a home office setup here, I'll be using the companion app today because that's the easiest to connect. The companion app is something that you can download from the iOS store onto any iOS device that supports ARKit, which at this point is really most of them. And to connect it, all I have to do is open that up on my iPad that I have here. And then on my setup panel, click Start, right? And as soon as I do that, this server connection that is happening here is starting to display on my iPad screen, and I can just tap it, and like that, I'm connected, and you can see that I'm able to move in 6 degrees, so that's rotation as well as sideways movement here. I'm going to try and show this to you real quick. It's always a little difficult to show this on the screen, but there you can see that I basically have a view inside the scene, right? So I see something very, very similar to what we see on our engine viewport here. I'm going to quickly switch to an image to show you this a little better. So this is what it looks like on the screen, right? And we have a HUD. We have some controls at the bottom as well. Here's a record button that I'll be making good use of today. We have a lot of customizability in this. So there is, like, for example, this green box here, right? We have a lot of options for customizing one or multiple of those. And then there's also these little cycles on the screen. You don't have to have these are optional, but they're very useful because they are in fact on-screen joysticks, right? So I can use them, for example, to move myself inside the scene with a joystick, right? That's what I'm doing right now. Because, of course, it is important to be able to move your camera through motion tracking, but often you also want to have different and other options of moving yourself, because it's nice to be able to go somewhere else in the scene quickly. And so joystick is a great way for that. We'll see some more advanced options later as well. Another thing that we can do is we can change the scale of ourselves, our physical world, to the virtual environment that we're in, right? And so I can use this movement scaling section, for example, and I'll go through all the other sections in a bit as well, but I can use this movement scaling section to, for a while, scale myself up dramatically. So now I'm 100 times the size of my virtual scene, and this allows me to just fly around real quick, find a different position. Maybe I want to start a shot here, right? Or maybe my starting position was actually good. Find wherever I want to be, set myself to a normal scale again, and I can start photography here, right? So these are just ways that are kind of necessary to not be stuck in a place in your virtual world, but be able to move as well or better as you can in the physical world. And then why don't we do a quick take here? Let's find some sort of starting frame. Maybe this. Let's scrub through the sequence a little bit. Maybe we want to start here, right? And then I can hit record either on my screen, or I'm going to do it on my iPad because that's more convenient for me. Start recording here. You can see that the animation sequence immediately starts playing as well. That animation is all contained inside one level sequence here, and then Dragonfly has just the ability to select the level sequence to know which level sequence with the animation we want to link to that recording, and also play back while we're checking the recording. And so we can go over to review and look at our shot immediately. And here it is. That's what I just recorded. You can see that I did this a little shaky. That's all the case if you're recording handheld. So I can fix that though, a bit of smoothing here, just giving myself a little edge in terms of what it looks like, maybe even slightly more. All of this is non-destructive, so if I go overboard, I can take it off again as well. Yeah, maybe like this, right? And then as I create more and more shots, they all show up in this list here. And this list gives me the ability to rate shots. Maybe this is like something 3 stars, somewhere in the middle. Hopefully I'll do a better one later. And I can rate them. As I said, I can sort them by shot name, by rating. I can search for them, right? So this gives you a really nice interface to deal with potentially hundreds and hundreds of shots that you might create. And this is a good time, I think, to quickly talk about the fact that Dragonfly also works very different from normal take recording in Engine, in the sense that we're not yet working with a level sequence at all, right? Normally, if you would create a camera animation, the first step would be to create a level sequence. In our case, that's all handled by Dragonfly, and at this point, there isn't a level sequence yet. That's because Dragonfly has a philosophy of, in this stage of our recording, to work kind of separately from the engine, work alongside it, basically. And it is creating its own recording files. We can go into the project folder here, where there is the recordings folder. And in here, there's our Dragonfly recording file and a little meta file next to it with some information on the shot that we just took. And this is great because it means that we're not clogging up our content folder with a bunch of little sequences for different shots, right? For me, a lot of shots that I take aren't quite up to my own standards, to be honest. So in the end, when I work here, I find that it's very normal to throw away a bunch of takes, right? You only want to work with the good ones. And it's great to have this intermediary layer to then be able to take only those shots that I actually want to keep working with, maybe only the ones that have 5 stars, for example, and then work with them selectively. All the other ones stay here. If I want to have them later, I can still go back, but only the ones that I actually want to use do get promoted to be a level sequence afterwards. And it also has some other benefits that we would not need to go into fully. But for example, if you're doing more complicated things, like, for example, using this in play mode, maybe with some mocap going on, often you end up locking your engine to a certain tick rate. And we don't want to have Dragonfly be locked to that tick rate as well, because we want the ability for Dragonfly to record your motion tracking at all the speed that is coming in, right? If that's 120 hertz, for example, we want all those individual data points. And so that's great. Another point why it's great to have this separate. Also great for source control. There's a bunch of reasons, but I'm going to go on to exporting. And so once we're happy with these shots, that's the point to decide what we want to do with them pipeline-wise afterwards. If we are doing a more traditional pipeline, or if we're doing something where there is some rendering going on outside of Engine, we can export them as an FBX by selecting that here. And the first version of Dragonfly actually only had that option, so that is the old school way of doing it. And then, of course, more and more popular is to do level sequences and then to do some other work, or maybe even some light editorial in Engine. And if we want to do that, we can just select level sequence here, click export. We could do this with all of our sequences or multiple shots selected, and then that brings this shot that we just took into our content folder as a level sequence with exactly the name that we gave it originally, right, for us to do whatever we typically do with level sequences inside of Unreal Engine. I think that gives you a good overview of the workflow. Next, I want to talk about a couple of really cool tools that are in Dragonfly that you won't need for any and all shots, but that are coming in handy in certain situations. Before I do that, maybe this is a good point in time to open up real quick in case there are questions about anything that I've already covered. Right. There will also be another longer, fully open Q&A at the end. So if you have general questions, you be sure you can ask those all in the end. But if there's any question that we should talk about right now about what we've already talked about, that is a good time now. Is there anything, Ed? Have you seen anything?
Yeah, so there's one about the presets for cameras. That we will actually talk about in a bit. So that's kind of do that then. But I do want to very quickly touch on sort of while we're kind of talking about the general workflows and some of these really nice tools. So one of the things that we can do, and Johannes, you can kind of quickly show off afterwards, is the ability to do a viewport recording. And as it relates to kind of being like using Dragonfly as a part of an integrated production pipeline inside of a facility, what all of these recording files, kind of saving them outbound and kind of having this separate review process and being able to create viewport recordings that's simultaneous to recording just a camera track. These are all kind of pipeline integration tools. So for example, if you're shooting your virtual camera remotely, being able to automatically ingest this into Frame.io for review and approval is super important. The ability to kind of check in your recording files, your snapshots and things like that, independent to your Unreal project is also super important for certain workflows. So Dragonfly does have a lot of these affordances in place because it's also designed to meet the needs of really large teams that have like very rigid pipelines in place.
Yeah, I think that's another aspect of the history of this tool, is that originally we built it with large teams, very established studios in mind, with their workflow needs. And that's great because that helped us kind of battle-proof this in that way, and also make sure that the efficiency is there that you need if you're on set and it's stressful and there's like a very expensive DP standing next to you with very clear expectations. But then over time, we also brought in the other side of the equation of smaller creators, indie creators. So that's really interesting to cater to both of those audiences now. Part of doing that is some of these tools that I'm going to show to you now. So that is, for one, the ability to create snapshots. Snapshots essentially are a bookmark in space and time that also remember your camera settings. So as if you could say, oh, this is a good frame, I want to remember this, but I also want to move on and get back to this later, right? So let's say we are in a certain position in our scene. We have a certain frame. Let's use one similar to the one that we just took again, right? Maybe a little earlier here. And then we can create a snapshot, which just shows up in our snapshot list with information on what the camera was. And then we can move on, right? Maybe we want to go to a different position in the scene, maybe something like this, or probably not inside the house. That's not the best way of doing things. Maybe we've also moved to a different point in time here. Let's say this. We might have a different lens for this. So let's go with something, maybe something super wide here. Something like this. Something unreasonably wide, right? And we can create another snapshot. And we can do scene scouting this way, essentially, and just find all our starting frames. And then snapshots give us the ability to jump back and forth between them. We can always click go to and jump between these locations. And we can also click restore, which then restores our sequence position and our camera settings. And go to and restore combined, again, give us the ability to jump between these instances where we're at this frame, we're at this position, we have this camera setting, and now we're again back at our starting position with a different frame, different camera settings. So this is great to just create a bunch of snapshots like these ahead of time, and then not have to worry about the movement that's involved and the rearranging of the camera when it's time to actually do the shot. And similar to the recording files that I showed you earlier, we also have a snapshot folder that contains the two snapshots that we just took. So if, for example, you want to go really overboard with this and you have a large number of snapshots for different days, for example, then you can save these out, make a subset of them, just bring the 10 that you need on any given day, for example. Just makes it easier to work with this. Another benefit of working with Snapshot that I really like is the ability to quickly redo takes. So I could do my shot again here, maybe like this, right? And maybe I'm actually not quite happy with this. This wasn't my best take ever. I can just click go to and restore. I'm back at my starting frame. Maybe I actually want to start a little differently. I can also update my snapshot, right? So I can say this is now my starting position. I can hit record again. Maybe this is a better shot. Maybe I should actually do something like this, right? Maybe that's still not quite the thing. Click go to restore. Be back at my starting point, do another recording. I think you get the idea, right? This is just a way for me to do this over and over again really quickly until I have the perfect take without spending a lot of time on it, which is great. Another feature that's nice, so these are going to be 3 features. Another feature that's nice is platforming. Since we are working in a virtual environment, we don't get some of the benefits of the physical world. For example, physicality is something we're crucially missing here. In a real world shoot, I can take a camera, I can attach a cage to it, I can clamp it to a car, the car drives off, the camera is being driven with the car thanks to physics, right? Doesn't quite work the same way in a virtual environment, but we do want to have the ability to basically attach ourselves to objects in the scene. Maybe, for example, we want to attach ourselves to this robot. I recommend doing this with something moving, otherwise it's only half as fun. So I can take this picker, take this robot, select it, and then this robot also has a bunch of different meshes and skeletons, so I can even select which part of the robot I want to be attached to. For example, this one. And then as I scrub through the animation, you can see that now my camera is automatically being moved with the robot. Right, and I can still move my camera if I want to, right? I'm not at all locked to the robot. I could also walk away from the robot. I can still do anything that I could before. It's just that now my frame of reference is this robot, including its movement, right? And we can also go one step further. You can see that right now it's just about the position. I'm not being rotated. And this is great if I'm doing a follow shot, for example. Sometimes we want to control our own rotation fully, but we can also mirror the robot's rotation by hitting this little icon here. And now, as I scrub through the sequence again, you can see we're actually being rotated with the robot. So that's what we would be doing if we were attaching ourselves to a car. Again, I can still fully move myself, but I'm relative to the robot now. And you can use this for exactly what I just said, but there's also other things that you can do with this. For example, you could emulate a dolly, right? You could create an actor in Unreal that moves along a spline, for example, and then you attach yourself to that actor, and that's your dolly. Or something I've seen people do is they will create a recording where they are just doing upwards movement, for example, and then they export that as level sequence, platform to that camera actor, and basically record over the previous take. So a lot of things you can do with this. It's really, really useful in a lot of situations like this. Let's detach ourselves from the robot again to show you another feature, which is kind of nice. Which is recording speed. So let's say we want to record something in the beginning of this sequence. There is a point here where all these robots come out of this window, right? So that's probably where they sleep or whatever. And this movement is pretty quick. Here, let's take a look at it. So that's the beginning. There they are, right? And playing this back, you can see this upwards movement is what I want to catch. I want to create a tracking shot here maybe, but it's pretty quick movement. And especially if I switch to a longer lens, something like 105, or maybe something slightly less long, something like an 85 maybe, right? If I'm taking this and if I'm trying to catch this shot, I have done this a couple of times, but let me try again, because it is pretty, yeah, like a tracking shot like this is just basically impossible in this scenario. At least for me. Maybe you have superhuman reflexes. But if you don't, then recording speed is for you. Because what we can do here is we can set the speed that our animation is being played back at. So going back to our starting frame here, recording speed, let me move out of the way here real quick. Recording speed is a setting in our recording section. And let me set this to something like 7, for example, I think is a good value. And this means that our animation is now going to be played back at a 7th of its original speed. Let's give that a try. Let's see if I can be better this time. Right, you can see how slowly everything suddenly is, how much control I have over this movement. I can pretty well follow all the movements of this robot and take my shot. And in a second, I'll show you, oops, there, disregard the ending there, that was all planned. In a second, I'll show you the final shot of this. And you'll see, also let's apply some smoothing, because otherwise this is going to be very janky. You can see that we get this shot at the speed that it's meant to be at, right? Like our animation is playing back in the correct speed. It's just that I had a lot more time to make this shot work, including this beautiful pan away at the end. And another thing that is unrelated to recording speed, but is nice to mention at this point is if you've taken a shot like this and you're really happy with your movement, for example, right? You think this is probably as good as this animation gets, 5 stars, right? But sometimes you then think, should have used a different lens though, right? And Dragonfly allows you to switch that after the fact now. So I was doing this with an 85. Maybe I actually think I should have gone with that 105mm lens. I can just switch this, take a look at what my shot that I previously recorded looks like here. Just as beautiful, only better. Hit save, and this is what my lens is now. Right. So these are a couple of, I think, really cool features that help you in the day-to-day to create shots that are better under certain situations where you need these specific tools. Next up, I want to show you a couple of things that are new. Things that are new in Dragonfly 3 specifically. Before we do that, maybe let's take another quick break and see if there's anything we should talk about what we just saw. I think you're muted, Norman.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so one of the things that we should probably kind of go into a little bit more detail is the additive recording process. So the whole master sequence side of things. Johannes can kind of show it later, but generally, so Dragonfly works on the assumption that, and it doesn't need to have this, by the way, but if you already have a pre-recorded sequences, so you have a performance that you want to do cinematography on, we call that a master sequence. And you will be able to load that in, and we will additively record the Dragonfly camera animation on top of it. So that's basically how it's working. And then we have a bunch of questions here, and I want to kind of go into just a little bit more detail on the text answers. So we have people asking about, does it support like camera wheels and things like that? So a lot of the wheels now comes into Unreal as a live link source. So if all that you're doing is controlling the orientation of the wheel, then you can absolutely do that. So one of the things that we've seen people do is they will have a Vive tracker coming in via Live Link, and then they'll have a wheel that comes in via Live Link.
Yeah.
Then they could either combine these two tracking sources together and feed it into the custom tracker, or they can use Live Link to drive an object in Unreal and then platform Dragonfly onto that object, then set the Dragonfly tracking source to be using the wheel. And both of these approaches is going to allow you to record the correct camera motion. But then obviously the difference is the origin of the camera with respect to the world is different, because platform kind of moves the origin along with the object that you're tracking. So if you want an absolute world position, then combining the two as a custom tracker is probably the better approach. Did I miss anything else? Yeah, so an earlier one about ingesting the scene into Frame.io. So yeah, when Johannes is recording, one of the recording settings will allow you to record the Dragonfly camera track and the viewport at the same time. So if you set up your system to kind of look for video files in a directory, you can kind of push that directly into Frame.io. So we have that. So we seem to do that for approvals. And just basically almost like a virtual daily, if you will. So it's really cool.
Yeah, we'll actually look at that as well in a second. Another thing that is not really related to this, but feels kind of fitting to me, so I'm just going to mention it, is the way that the companion app really receives the image stream from our viewport is now through an NDI stream, which has a couple of technical benefits, but also has the benefit, if we're talking about getting our images and other ways of viewing this, has the benefit that with NDI, you can very easily add additional viewing devices, right? You can add any number of just NDI viewers. They can be in a browser, they can be on an iOS device, as long as they're in the same network. It's really easy to catch an NDI stream, and that way you can give this to other people so they can also see what's going on. Or you could also hook this into a system that then records the stream as you are working with it.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point, because this is particularly important for, say, if you're on a mocap shoot, right? Because you can use the Dragonfly virtual camera in tandem with anything that's coming into Unreal via, say, Live Link. So a lot of people do use this as a way to monitor and frame performance capture sessions, and being able to mirror the feed as NDI give other members of the crew a really simple way to kind of see the exactly the same thing that the virtual DP is seeing. And also, a lot of the places already have infrastructure for supporting NDI. So it just gives you another way to manage, redistribute, or even kind of some of the really cool stuff allow you to send it over to another site, to the point where maybe the director is completely offsite, and you're doing these motion, and you might even be doing, like during the early days of COVID, where you have two different stages in two different parts of the world working together at the same time. That's also a possibility that's enabled by NDI.
Yeah. Speaking of other ways to collaborate, because that's something we won't show today because there's not much sense in showing this here. But just to mention this at the side, Dragonfly also supports multi-user. So if you are doing a multi-user session and you want to collaborate with your on your shots together, then the way Dragonfly will interface with that, everyone inside the multi-user session who has a Dragonfly plugin installed will essentially be able to work with that plugin as if everyone was in the same room working on one machine, right? So you can have someone have it holding the iPad, moving the camera, and then someone else can look at the settings in your operator main panel and change the camera settings for them. Things like that make it really easy. We also have our own collaboration tool called Beehive that also does a bunch of other things. That's also another way to collaborate remotely. Just good time for me to put that in, because not something we're showing today. But yeah, there are options for collaboration.
Is that something along the lines of the Beehive? Is that something along the lines of a multi-user session?
So
the best way to think about it is that it's one tool that kind of combines the capabilities of Live Link, Level Snapshot, and parts of the capabilities of Perforce. It is not. It is a tool that's really designed to kind of allow for real-time, rapid collaboration, where every single action is tracked. And if we have some time in the end, we may even show a quick video of Dragonfly and Beehive working together, because what it enables is this idea of shot tracking. So you can very, very quickly kind of essentially have a situation where every shot that you're making corresponds to a slightly different version of the scene. So every scene has a slight adjustment, the placement of the tables, the chairs, maybe the direction of the sun, that sort of stuff. So, but doing all that without creating lots of different variations of the same scene that need to be then separately managed. So, yeah, if we get some time in the end, we'll kind of we can show that.
Yeah, Beehive is an amazing thing. It's a separate product. We won't be able to cover it fully today, but yeah, in the sense of operating with Dragonfly, that's some of the things you can do with it. Is there any that we should tackle right now before we will be doing the Q&A at the end? Otherwise, I'll jump into Dragonfly 3 features, which are also going to be interesting. I think I'll just be doing that, right? You both seem keen.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool.
Let's do it.
So back to our engine instance here. Dragonfly 3 as a release really has a theme, interestingly, which is it is all about bringing virtual cinematography and physical cinematography closer together. And this has been coming in a way. And this is also mirroring, I think, what's happening in the industry overall, which is that a few years ago, most people doing visual production were very technical people coming from the engine side of things, maybe coming from pipeline, right? But more and more people with a film background are entering the space. And with them, a lot more attention, I think, is being paid to how the image actually looks and what the differences are between physical images and virtual images. And also, as the rendering quality progresses, we're also more nitpicky about, it's still not quite a real camera, is it? Right? And so that's everything in Dragonfly 3 is kind of themed around this. One of the best ways to bring physical and visual cameras together, of course, is Simulcam. And Dragonfly has a feature for automating Simulcam. We will actually do another stream only on this with the proper setup, with tracking in place, with the camera in place to show you that. So I'm not going to jump into that fully today, but I want to give you like a quick teaser of what's going on there and why that's cool. Just as a recap, so we're all on the same page, because Simulcam, I feel like, is the part of visual production that is elusive sometimes. So the idea with Simulcam is you have a camera that is motion tracked, right? In this case, we have a camera that is motion tracked with a Vive Mars cam track unit here. And then we're filming a green screen environment and doing live compositing. So in this case, you can see we have an engine window here. This is actually Dragonfly Simulcam, where we do see our actor in green screen, but then we have a virtual set extension, the same thing here. In this case, our companion app here isn't what drives this camera. What's driving this camera is this physical camera. In this case, this is just a screen for secondary viewing here. Just as a quick recap of what Simulcam is, so we're all on the same page. So you can do Simulcam in Unreal Engine using Composure. There's a window. Bring this up from the visual production section. Composure window is here, right? And you can use this to do Simulcam. The issue with it is that the workflow involves quite a few steps. I don't quite remember how many. I think Norman remembers all too well, but it's really high, like something like 60 or so steps you need to take to make compositing work. You need to set up your layers. You need to define where your objects are, foreground, background layer. You need to select your camera feed. You need to maybe select your time code and sync, right? And all those things have a couple of different settings that you need to go through to make this work that are potential failure points, right? And then also by doing this, I feel it's very common that you turn your whole project into a Simulcam project. You have your composure stack. You're probably not going to mess with it anymore once it's worked. Maybe another project, another copy that is not Sam, but it really goes against the idea of Dragonfly to have something plug and play, where your scene is essentially the equivalent of a physical set, and Dragonfly is the tool that you bring. We don't want to require you to have two sets, one for Simulcam, one for virtual camera work. So as I switch Dragonfly to Simulcam, have a look at this composure window, because immediately when I hit Simulcam here, you'll suddenly we have a composite here. And this is automation that's going on. Also see this at the top of the Viewport linking. That's also Dragonfly going through a bunch of automations, finding the sync source, finding the time code source, and finding the camera feed. I'm going to show you Simulcam fully today. I actually don't have a camera connected through either a Blackmagic capture card or something like an Azure capture card. Dragonfly would find that feed automatically, put it into our composure plate, just as it has already put all our elements, for example, in the scene, into the background plate. Now, if we want to do something with the foreground and the background plate, so 3-plate compositing, it's already set up the foreground plate, so we can easily move the object there. We also have a holdout set up already. You can also see that we're being moved to a different position. This is because this is the origin. Dragonfly has this idea of a location, right? That's where you put the reference point that you're working with, the origin of your work in the scene. And that's also the case for tracking systems, right? For example, if you're working with a Mars, as an example, then you also have an origin. You can also recenter that. And so bringing us to this immediately means that there's a good chance that we're already aligned. And our time code, as you saw, detected already. So essentially, we would be good to do Simulcam work. We also have this additional window for the chroma keying that allows you to go through these options just nicer than in the normal workflow. What this all looks, again, is something we're going to show you in an additional stream. I just wanted to take the opportunity to show you this automation, because I think if you've worked with Composure, then you probably appreciate everything that's going on here. And then, as I said, we can also take it off again. Keep looking at this Composure window here. As I click back to virtual camera, our Composure stack is gone again. We're back in virtual camera mode. And can do all our virtual camera work here as we normally do. So let's move back to the middle of the screen, because that is a little more pretty than where our origin is. Another part of this idea of bringing physical and virtual cameras closer together, and also something that's crucial if we're doing Simulcam, is the idea of lens, right? It's something that's also, I think, something that a lot of people are looking at. It's also like lens manufacturers are coming out now with their offerings of their SD maps for lens distortions. But the question is, how can we apply them in a way that works really well in this workflow? And to make this happen, I will go into the lens distortion in a second, but to make this happen, we actually completely overhauled how cameras and lenses are defined in Dragonfly. Previously, there was basically just text, just a list of lenses with a few parameters. I can still show you this in our legacy windows here. So this is what our lens definitions looked like, right? Just a bunch of lenses. And then we had the same thing for our sensors, essentially similar, right? And this was fine for the time being, but it obviously didn't allow us the flexibility of adding more complex things like lens distortions. And also managing that wasn't the best always. What we're doing now is inside our projects folder, we have inside the Dragonfly folder, neat little folders, 2 of them, for our cameras. And these are assets that define all our camera settings. And then the same thing for lenses. And these are, again, lenses that define all our lenses. And I can take these individually. I can copy them to a different project, right? Just makes it so much more easy to work with these lenses. I can also easily create a new one here just by right-clicking, as we're used in Engine, right? And then I can open that up. I can double-click these here to go into their settings. Sneak peek here at lens distortion. And then I can also edit any lens that I'm working with from normal operator main window just by clicking edit the selected lens, the lens that we're currently working with. So let's take a look at this. This is our dedicated editor now for all the things that we might want to change about this lens. So you see the normal settings that are here, our f-stop, our focal length, all the things that a lens has. But then we can also change our distortion. So there's 2 ways that Dragonfly supports. One of them is distortion, is SD maps, right? You just copy them in, and Dragonfly applies your distortion from the SD map automatically, no further action required on your part. Or you can use coefficients. And with coefficients, that's a list of numbers. So we can start putting our numbers in here. I'm just going to use a few example numbers here to create some sort of distortion. Right? And then crucially, we can add a little bit of an overscan factor so to cover that green area. And now we have a distorted lens. And as I move up and down, you can probably see, if you look at the edge of that building there, how the lens distortion is very subtly but relevantly change what our image looks like by bending that edge. I want to quickly take off the overscan factor again, though, because I think it's really relevant to talk about this for a second. What is this green area that we see here with lens distortion applied when we haven't added an overscan factor? This green area essentially is a part in a physical camera, right? This is essentially a part of your sensor that gets exposed to light with this lens, right? If we add the overscan factor, we can see what's here, and that's the case in a physical lens as well. But if we are working with an undistorted virtual lens, then the only area that it sees is this inner area here. So really what's happening is, if we were using this virtual lens without distortion, we would have a different field of view than we have on our actual physical lens. And if we're doing Simulcam, then of course that's relevant. Besides just the distortion itself, this field of view change is relevant. And if we're trying to emulate a physical lens for something that's maybe not even Simulcam, maybe it's just Previs or maybe it's Final Pixel, it's still good to have the ability to get closer to that lens simulation that includes the distortion and this changed field of view as well. And then another aspect of more physical lenses that people have been trying to do for a while and have been asking us to find a better solution for is anamorphic lenses. And distortion and anamorphic lenses, of course, work together as well. So I can change this from a spherical to an anamorphic lens, and then I get a squeeze ratio input field. Right? And any anamorphic lens that you buy, you'll always know it's like a 1.5 or a 2 times anamorphic lens. So I can just punch in that number here, this 1.5, for example. This is 2.0, right? Whatever our lens is. And this then immediately gives us an anamorphic lens. And what's nice about this is the fact that this is inside the lens definition. So if I'm using other lenses as well that are spherical, maybe, I don't necessarily have to change my sensor, as I don't change my camera in the physical world if I'm switching between an anamorphic and a spherical lens, right? It's all part of the lens definition now. And besides just the changed aspect ratio here, that's typical for an anamorphic lens, of course, compared to the sensor, we also get some of the optical qualities of an anamorphic lens, right? So we get some of the anamorphic softness. And we also get, if I pull us out of focus here real quick, we also get the oval bokeh shapes, of course, and lens flares as well. All these things that get oval in an anamorphic lens, that happens here as well, because we're emulating how a lens passes through an anamorphic lens, how light passes through an anamorphic lens, and then gets de-squeezed as part of the post-process here. So that's anamorphic lenses. Another feature that is there that is probably you might use or you might not use this. So this is just an offering, is the option to go further in terms of your camera settings in the way that they affect exposure. So of course, if we are working in Unreal Engine does this auto exposure thing that you are probably used to, where if I'm changing my iris, for example, to something higher, we don't really see any change in exposure here, right? It's all pretty much well exposed. Sometimes we want there to be images be underexposed though, or overexposed. So we can change this from Unreal settings to physical simulation. And now, as I change things like my f-stop, you can see my exposure going down. I can change my camera ISO, changing my exposure. I can add an ND filter to lower my exposure, right? All of this resembles what it's like to work with exposure on a physical lens. Quick caveat here is that most scenes that we've seen in Unreal Engine actually don't mirror how the physical world is lit. Skylights, for example, in engine scenes are typically super dim. So you might have to either adjust your lighting in the scene or just set your ISO to something unreasonable to make the lighting work. But it's a great tool to have if you want to play around with exposure. That's different from just the normal, always more or less spot on Unreal exposure settings. And then the final piece of making these images look like physical camera images, or like actual camera plates, is output color space. Color space is something that's, of course, already super relevant for you if you're working with physical camera plates, I suspect. And then if we're venturing into Simulcam, where we combine that physical plate with our virtual plate, or if we're just creating virtual cinematography, but we want it to match later on in the pipeline, color space is relevant. So we can set our output color space to all these different ones. In the backend, this is converted through OpenColor.io, basically going through an ACES transformation. So that should give you basically the industry standard for color transformation, making sure that your images are color correct. There's another place actually where we also apply color space, just to show you that real quick. If we go into the camera definition, it looks really similar to the lens preset editor that we've seen previously. This is for the camera though. We can go to this camera profile setting at the bottom here, and we have the color space option here as well. Why is that? Well, because if we're working with a physical camera plate, for example, from our red, then we might have that in something like red lock. Right? This is not in Rec 709, even though we might want to work with Rec 709 in the end. From our red, it comes in Rec lock. And so we can set our virtual camera plate, our virtual camera definition, to red lock as well. And then that makes sure that your virtual and your physical plates match. And then in the end, again, it gets all transformed into whatever output color space you want to use by selecting it here. Yeah, so I think Simulcam for one, but then these 3 or 4 things, depending on how you want to count it: lens distortion, anamorphic lenses, physical exposure, and color space really go a long way in bringing our visual camera closer to the physical thing, right? And then as a closing thing here, I want to show you the feature. That's a little feature, but some people are kind of happy about it. And Norman has been asking me to show it to you the whole time as well, so I'm not going to disappoint him there, which is Viewport Recording. So again, we went through the pipeline or this workflow earlier, right? Like we're creating a shot here, then we can review them, then we can turn them into level sequences, continue to work with them that way, render them in the end. That's all great. But sometimes let me move to the other side. Sometimes we want to have our images immediately, ideally, right? So that's what animation sequence and viewport stream recording does. If I set our recording type to that, animation sequence and viewport stream, and then go back to do a quick recording here, let's find a point in time, maybe simply this, right? Doesn't have to be special. So this is our recording. You can see also, let me stop this recording real quick and move to a normal recording speed again. So let's try that again. There's our shot, right? Something like this. Amazing cinematography on my part. So of course we can look at the review, and that's just what we looked at earlier, right? Here's our shot. We can smooth it. We can play it back. There you go. But we can also bring up our project folder again and go into the recordings folder here. And alongside our normal recording files and metadata files for this shot, since we turned on the sequence, the viewport recording feature, also gives us a video file, which we can open and playback, which is expected from a video file, right? And this just gives us an immediate rendering of exactly what our camera saw while we were taking the shot. We can then to someone for review or into another system. Really great way of immediately getting to see what we've done. And then, of course, if we later find that that's our shot, but we still want to do some post-processing on it, we can then go back to our review panel and take the shot out as a level sequence, for example. Yeah, so that's Dragonfly. This was specifically Dragonfly 3 at the end. Hope that makes sense to you. Hope you like it. Hope also this sparked some questions, because I think it's a good time to move into our final open QA section. How about that?
Awesome. Thank you. That was super interesting, and I learned tons of things I didn't know about Dragonfly, and I definitely concur with the Composure business. That's really exciting to see that you guys have made it actually usable. I teach that, and it's really fiddly to put together. So yeah, I think you guys are doing amazing work. It's really cool to see.
Thank you.
No, you bet. Yeah, thank you. I'm sure the community thanks you as well. So
yeah, and again, if you're interested in the Composure side of things, I think we will try and dedicate a full demo just for Composure with a physical tracking system and all of that good stuff.
Fantastic. Well, I'm definitely interested to see that myself, for sure. So we got some more questions over here.
So there is a question about in Simulcam mode. Again, there's a separate stream. I'm just going to answer this question real quick because it's a simple one and a good question. Is there an automated solution to apply the offset from nodal point of camera lens tracker? So this really depends on the tracker that you're working with, because they don't necessarily supply the nodal point offset automatically. Just to use an example, if you're working with the Mars tracker, then that'll give you the nodal point offset in the camera, in the lens calibration. Will be one of the numbers that it gives you at the end. And then you can just copy those numbers. And if I really quickly go back to my screen share here, in the setup panel, there is a section on the left where you can, here we go, we can just enter all those nodal point offset values to apply those.
Yeah, and there was a question earlier about whether or not we could kind of take in the HTC calibration files. So HTC and Glassbox were working very closely together to kind of iterate on both Mars and Dragonfly. So in the next iteration, you can expect the Mars calibration tool to output files that can be imported directly into Unreal, and turn into an Unreal Lens profile. And also, Dragonfly will also give you a similar pathway where you can just pull that data into Dragonfly, and you will automatically create a Dragonfly lens profile with matching properties, and automatically put in nodal offsets and center point offsets.
Yeah, and of course, in absence of that, or with any other tracking system, if you're not using the Mars, then you can copy the values straight into the lens definition in the place that I showed you earlier. And also, just as another quick note on that, the nice thing about the new lens definitions as well is that those will get retained inside the lens definition, right? It's just part of the normal lens. So once you have those values in there once, that'll just be how your lens is, similar to a physical lens you pull out of the back, and it doesn't suddenly have different distortion.
Yeah, totally.
Somebody else here is asking, is there any future multicam support for Simulcam?
So a multicam that's a really interesting question, and especially so since I think there's a lot of considerations for multicam that goes way beyond Dragonfly, just in terms of what you can do inside one engine. So typically, I think if you can, what's recommended for multicam is to have two instances, have two machines with two engines running, and then depending on what you want to do with it, if it's like a live stream or if it's a recording, record those separately. It's what I would do if you can, because that'll save you a lot of the headache of trying to do it in one instance.
Yeah, trying to render twice on the same machine.
Yeah, and definitely also getting like the SDI link to come in, feed it into like two separate materials and textures. It can be done. We've even looked into potentially offloading one of the render onto a separate GPU as well, because of course, like with Unreal introducing mGPU support in a kind of more accessible way for in-display, we looked into that possibility, but the conclusion is it's probably better if you're working with multiple machines in that sense.
Yeah, this is also the kind of thing that we are super. I mean, if this is something you're actively interested in, then feel free to reach out to us, because that's something that we love to brainstorm on and see if there is a solution that can be built. But again, like Simulcam, just because of even just the limitations of what an instance can render or what one machine can render, is often something where it's easier to do multiple machines, multiple instances, rather than trying to squeeze it all into one.
So there's a question here with Edelkorn. So Edelkorn is a slider, right? Like I think I've only ever seen. Let me quickly Google this. Yeah, there's some there. Oh, they also do heads as well. So in theory, if there is a way for you to get the motion control data out of your motion control equipment and into Unreal, then yeah, Dragonfly should be able to just pull that. So if it outputs it in terms of like 3D, then you can use a 3D plugin to kind of access that data via live link. Or one of the things that we also support is the custom tracker. So I kind of talked about that a little bit before. So any transform, any location, any translation, any rotation that you can get into Unreal through whatever way that you have access to, maybe like a serial interface or whatever it may be, you can just feed it into Dragonfly through the custom tracking API. And then all you really need to do is change the tracking source, and then all you need to do is change the tracking source from AirKit to custom, and then you'll just be able to drive it that way.
Yeah, And that can be done through a simple blueprint. Besides what I've shown you today, there's another side to Dragonfly that I haven't shown off here because it's a lot more technical, or at least a little bit more technical, which is Dragonfly is actually super customizable as well. If you have a specific workflow that you need to make happen that is somewhat different from what Dragonfly does through the interface, all of what's in the interface, and that goes also for tracking input, for motion tracking for the device, but also for joysticks. Maybe you have buttons that you want to hit to trigger certain things, right? All of those things can be connected through blueprints, where Dragonfly has all these functions exposed as blueprint functions. And yeah, that's a great sandbox if you want to build on top of what Dragonfly does and make it even more unique or custom.
All right. Any more? Any more? Do we get any more questions in the chat here? Those are most of the ones. There was one person who was asking the question I didn't completely understand, but it was, they were saying, can we go into the real world and use this? I'm not 100% sure if you want to ask that again. But
yeah. I mean,
but I think the assumption is
generally speaking,
is essentially asking about latencies. I think that user is basically asking about Simulcam. Can we use it with a real like a real live feed? I think.
I see.
It's one about how do you define Dragonfly? How do you define Dragonfly?
Great. That's no problem. Dragonfly is just the name of the product. Dragonfly is a virtual camera tool. It is a way of doing virtual cinematography as close as possible to how a physical camera works, with as little as possible necessary engine knowledge.
Cool. It looks like that person was talking about Simulcam, so I think you covered a lot of that.
Perfect.
Yeah, if there's no other question, I might go play that video. Or do you have that video, Johannes, on the shot tracking?
You can play it. I can also find it probably. Before we do that, I just want to add one more thing. If you want, you can use this time to bring it up, unless you want me to do that. But I also just want to add one more thing, which, because we ended with talking a lot about tracking systems, and of course, tracking systems, things like Mars, things like OptiTrack, are a huge part of how this is used, right? And if we're doing Simulcam, if we're doing things like in-camera VFX, then of course high-end tracking is super essential. But then if we're talking about things like previs, things like just creating camera sequences for in-engine final or things related to that, I think it's worth iterating how much you can do with just the companion app. Because if you're just creating a single shot, then it doesn't actually matter that there is no real positional stability, that there might be some drift in your shot, because you're creating your shot and you are seeing the result. And if it works out, then great. And the iPad has also been like really a surprise for me over the past few years in how well it was accepted in high-end productions, because it's just so easy to hand to someone. It's not intimidating. It's just an iPad. I know what an iPad is. I can ship it to someone, right? It's just this really nice tool. And it's also, I think, great because it gives, I mean, most people have access to an iPad or an iPhone as just a way to dive into this real quickly. And then if we want to scale up to an OptiTrack system later on, we can. It's exactly the same workflow. It's just it's as simple as just changing the entry in one of these drop downs, and then you're off to OptiTrack, for example. But I just want to highlight how great I think the existence of ARKit tracking is for this, because it makes it so easy.
Right, really accessible. So, people can buy iPads.
There's a question for the outdoor side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tracking generally, you're using kind of there's certain solutions like say and stuff like that. So basically, there's trackers that you kind of mount onto cameras. But one of the really cool thing that you can actually can clamp a iPhone onto your camera and then use that as tracking. So that's absolutely something that you can do. And as a matter of fact, you could see like one of the tracking options of how you would communicate with the companion app is to basically have like control only and tracking only. So you don't even stream a viewport to it. So you can totally turn your companion app, which is running on your iOS device, to purely a remote control, or a purely just as a tracker. So just clamp your iPhone onto your camera, and you've got a tracking source, and you got some kind of tracking system you could use.
Yeah. Nice. I'll look if there's any more questions. Otherwise, I can give you this quick peek at what Beehive can do when we work with Dragonfly together. Should I do that, or is there anything else, Ed? Maybe do you see anything else that you want to?
I haven't seen any.
on?
So if you want to go
Cool.
ahead and
awesome.
show.
Yeah, then I'll quickly jump over to this again. So we're not going to explain Beehive fully for this. Just showing you a part that interfaces with Dragonfly as a little teaser, and then if you're interested, obviously you can dive into that more. But essentially, Beehive is a way to manage the data inside your Unreal Engine and Maya as well, if you want. It has this component of collaborating with multiple people across instances, but it also crucially has a component that keeps track of your editing history of the scene. Right, so it ties into things like Perforce, your version control, but on a real-time and edit-to-edit level that's hands-off. Right, that's just something that is happening in the background for you, and you can back in the editing history and look at that. And the way this is relevant to Dragonfly is because if you have both of them at the same time running, then they talk to each other. And Dragonfly tells Beehive every time it creates a shot, hey, I'm creating a shot. And then Beehive says, okay, I'm going to remember what the scene looks like for you at the time that you're taking this shot. Because often if you work in Engine and you're creating shots, but you're also still editing your scene, that becomes really difficult to track, right? Because you're creating shots and then you're moving a house, for example. And then in the next shot, that's good, but for the first shot that you took, the house should still be there. That just becomes a data management nightmare. So let's take a look at what that looks like with Beehive in the mix. And this is a recording of a session where you see all the orange interfaces, right? This is Beehive, and then we have Dragonfly as well. So what's happening here is we are creating some test shots. We have this mannequin that is walking through the scene. We're setting up a shot here, and then we have this shot one object that makes it really clear that we are looking at shot one here. And so we're setting up a shot, and as we are taking 3 shots in a row, for each of them, we will purposefully edit this text element, right, to simulate a situation where we are changing something in the scene. And in a real-world example, this would be a tree that gets duplicated or edited, or a mesh that's being brought in to have some other additional object, or a wall being moved that's in the way, right? But for us, it's just these highly visible shot one. So here's our first shot being created. You can see it says shot one, and it is red. And now we'll go into this object and change the color to be, also change the text to say shot 2. And then we're changing the color to be, instead of red, be a green color, right? And so then we can create a separate shot here. We're also working with snapshots here, as you can see, by the way. But that's just a side note that's being used to streamline this. We're taking a shot again, so you can clearly see this says shot 2. And in a normal workflow, we kind of would have broken our first shot already, right? If we go to review in what I showed you earlier, the first shot would now also say shot 2, because that's still the same object. We just edited in between, but we didn't actively do anything to preserve that editing history. And so here's the third shot saying shot 3 now, and is blue in color. And we're taking a third shot of this. There we go, seeing it in the distance, hitting record here in a minute, or actually in less than a minute, to take our third shot. There we go, right? So we have 3 different shots that all look at different versions of the scene. Normally, only the third one would be correct, but we just opened this shot in Dragonfly's review, and you can see it's correct. Shot 1, red, and here's shot 2. It's correct. Shot 2 in green, and the third one, shot 3 in blue. So quickly pausing this, because what's happening here is, again, Dragonfly and Beehive have talked to each other, and Beehive now knows what the scene state is for each of these shots. And as we load them in Dragonfly, Beehive quickly assembles that history state of our editing behind the scenes, so we can look at what this shot looked like here. Again, you can see us going through these shots again. And now we're going to take this one step further. And this is a bit of a sneak peek at a feature that we're working on. We can export these shots now. And now they're level sequences, right? Like, so now we've brought them out of Dragonfly and export them into level sequences. That still would be nice to see different scene states for them, because they really depend on the fact that they have different versions of this one text actor there. And so we're taking these 3 shots and aligning them on a sequence here. Just doing a quick edit of this, where again we see shot 1 first, then shot 2, and then shot 3. And as we play this back, watch how you can see, or maybe even can't see, how without delay, Beehive in the background just changes the scene state for us to a previous history state, just based on when this shot was created. So that's one of the things that Beehive can do when you're working with this. It just gives you the freedom of just do your work without worrying so much about data management. That's why we also call it a data engine sometimes. And talk to Dragonfly in the process. And then after the fact, you can look at your shot. They're all still whole. And you can then do any exporting, or if you want to have separate versions of that scene, you can do all of that after the fact. Yeah, so that's a quick sneak peek at Beehive. If you're interested in that, we have more information on that on our site. We can talk about Beehive for a whole hour, so I don't think this has covered it all, but just to give you an idea of some of the adjacent areas to cinematography that are also super, super fascinating.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing tons of information there. It's really, really insightful to see what you've been doing in the new release, and yeah, just wanted to thank you as we wrap today for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you for having us. You're doing a great thing for by doing these classes, so we'd love to see that. That's just awesome. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Well, hopefully we get to have you back. And yeah, I also want to thank all of our listeners today for joining this live stream. The recordings will be up straight away in a couple of the different platforms on YouTube and Facebook. And yeah, we posted all the links to Dragonfly and Glassbox and everything in the chat. But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. If you're interested in us again as a school, follow us at becomecgpro.com. And again, thank you, Johannes and Norman, today for joining us. All right, see you soon, everybody.